Now we're going to use what we've learned to write the equation of a sinusoidal function from a given graph. Let's take a look at the process we'll use. So the first thing I'm going to do once I've taken a look at the graph is I'm first going to locate the midline. So I'm going to find the place that's halfway between the max and the min. Then I'm going to determine whether the sine or the cosine is the better fit. And I'm going to use the sine function if the y-intercept of the graph is on the midline. And I'm going to use the cosine function if the y-intercept of the graph is at the maximum or minimum. And so that's how I'm going to make the decision. And then I'm going to determine the amplitude. And from that, I'll get the a in the function. And then I'm going to determine the period from the graph. And from that, I'm going to be able to use that the b I'm looking for is actually 2 pi divided by the period. So let's take a look at an example. I'd like to write the equation for the graph that's shown here. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the midline. So I'm going to follow my steps, locate the midline. And what I notice here is that the maximum is at 7 and the minimum is at -7. So the midline's halfway in between. This one's fairly straightforward. The midline's at y equals 0. So that k, that up-down shift, is 0. Second step, I said, is to determine whether I need sine or cosine, which one's the better fit. And so if I look at the y-intercept, I notice that the y-intercept is at the midline. And so I'm going to use sine since the y-intercept of the graph is on the midline. Then I'm going to determine the amplitude. And so now I know the midline is at 0. And I know the maximum is at 7, so the amplitude is 7. And then since the graph resembles y equals sine x, I'm going to use +7. Had the graph been reflected over the x-axis, I would have used -7. But this looks like the traditional sine graph. And then the last step before I write the equation is I'm going to determine the period, and from that determine what b is by doing 2 pi divided by p. Notice if I count off, the period is 8 units, so b would be 2 pi over 8, or pi over 4. So now all I need to do is take all of that information and put it into one equation, and you'll see that I did that here. There's my 7, which was the a, determined it was a sine function. There's my b, pi over 4, and multiply by x. Don't forget the x. A lot of students get really excited. They get all the numbers, and they forget the x. And then plus 0, which of course we know is not necessary to put here, but I'm going to put it just so that you can see I filled in all of the numbers I found. There was the midline I found. There was the trig function I determined. There was my a, which came out of the amplitude. And there's my b, which came out of the period.